Hello, you are now entering the infinite void. Hang on tight. We cannot save you now.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode. I'm your co-host Matty.
And I'm your co-host Jacob, and today's episode is part 10 of our series, The Future of Humanity, Final Thoughts. So this episode has been a long time coming, and it has had various delays, from me moving house again, to starting new jobs, to different seasons of the year. I think we started this series on May the 14th, so it's been quite long, like 7 months, almost 8 months. And yeah, it's been really fun to kind of work through all these different topics of the future, because anybody that does know me knows that that's probably my favorite thing to talk about. But yeah, because of all these little breaks and stuff that we've had to take, it has been a long time. So if anybody did listen from the first episode and you're still here now, you are a true Infinite Void fan. Respects to you, and thank you for kind of following us all this time, because I can imagine it must be quite confusing when we have been a little bit late and stuff. Hopefully going forward, we're going to be sticking to our kind of routine of one every other week. I don't see myself moving or having anything crazy in the foreseeable future, and I think Matty's good for a bit too now. So everything should be smooth sailing going forward. But yeah, it's just nuts that this is part 10. It's crazy long series. I think the other two that we've done were 3-parters and 5-parters. So this is a big boy. It's been a meaty subject matter to kind of get our teeth into. And we've kind of discussed in the past about doing like marathon episodes where I take all of the parts and kind of put it together in one listen episode, and this one would be absolutely crazy. It'd be like over 10 hours for sure.
Yeah, if anyone has just binged in the future, binged the entire series back to back, then well done.
It must be quite weird as well, because like you could watch these 10 episodes and watch the two people in them age 7 months.
Yeah, I feel like I've aged quite a lot in that time. But,
yeah, it's very interesting, and obviously cool little circle of life. We have now become those humans in the future, not the crazy far future that we talk about in these episodes, but we are in the future. But yeah, so we kicked this whole thing off with an introduction episode, and this was episode 28, which is a long time ago too. And yeah, with this episode, me and you kind of just sat down, didn't we? And we spoke about really a little bit on all of these subjects that we're going to kind of cover now. We kind of talked about where we wanted this to go. We weren't sure if it was going to be, I think we said in that episode, it was going to be either a 3-parter or a 5-parter, or we said it might be a few more than 5 because we couldn't agree on the 5 that we wanted. But we went all out in this, and we decided to go with 10. So that was cool. But yeah, that episode's interesting for me, because when we were sitting in it talking, some of the stuff that we mentioned, even about like the medical technology episode, for instance, I remember listening to a podcast that was very much on like nanotechnology, and I was convinced for that episode we were going to go in and I was going to be like, get ready to hear how we're going to live an extra 100 years, and how these nanobots are going to be attached to my white and red blood cells, and my cancers are going to be gone forever, and all this kind of stuff. But it changed when we got around to that episode, because I learned in research that we're quite far off from that. And if we do it, there's a lot of like ethical things. I think the big theme for me in all of this has been ethics, which is funny because that was what it was in the simulation theory one and in the AI series. For me has always been ethics, because talking about these topics is one thing, but then thinking about how it affects humans and our culture, I think is another big thing. And I think with all of these, like as we're going to go through the list, like even like with the next one with like transportation, there's loads of like really cool, wacky ideas that you can kind of mention when you're at the pub with your friends, or you're in a lecture room talking about what kind of way we can kind of tackle this or tackle that. But there's loads of things that come with it, to like how it like affects the habitat, if it's creating jobs, if it has major impacts on other areas of the world, if it's using certain materials. And I've found that has been the biggest thing for me in this entire series, is just, I feel like even though we kind of end the episodes on quite a depressing note sometimes, and we laugh about our crises that we always have, I think it's good sometimes to kind of realize that like we can do it, but we don't do it because it's sometimes not right to do it yet. Or we're not doing it because it has an implication, or somebody's not happy. I think that's good. I think it's good that we're not just doing things sometimes because we want to and we're telling everybody else to put up or shut up.
Yeah, I think looking back at all the episodes, sort of before we get into each of them, like I also had like an overarching thing that like in a lot of cases, obviously some of the episodes are like way off in the future, we're nowhere near, but in a lot of cases, like we do have a lot of this technology and a lot of things, just looking through them now. And I said we're going into more detail, but the transportation, the renewable energy, making food, a lot of the technology is already here. Like a lot of the things that the biggest sort of thing that maybe we have to change is, sort of people's perception of stuff and sort of like political willpower to get things done. As I said, with those ones, like money, no object, we could go out tomorrow and like completely redesign like our transportation systems, like, how we make food and stuff. But oftentimes we don't, and in some cases that maybe is a good thing, because as you said, it gives us time to sort of like think about the implications. But in some cases, and particularly with renewable energy and climate change, we probably need to start doing stuff sooner rather than later.
Yeah, no, I'd 100% agree with you. Yeah, like some of the ones on this list for sure, like climate change and renewable energy, and even transportation, because that kind of ties in with that, and agriculture and food, really, and medical technology to an extent. Actually, I'd say all of them. Apart from cryptocurrencies and NFTs and the Kardashev scale, really have an urgency or an importance to them, because even like planetary expansion, it's good to have that in case we don't figure out all of the others. And I'm always on the fence with the argument about, oh, we should fix this planet before we go to another one. And I understand both sides of that argument, because I get the people that are like saying, no, we should probably fix this before we take our bad habits somewhere else and wreck another one. But at the same time, like, there are consequences. Do you know what I mean? Like the climate isn't going to go, oh, well, you guys look like you've learned your lesson and you've changed. Don't worry about it. It's all going to be good. Like, it's still going to have consequences, and we're still going to lose land to rising sea levels, even if we manage to kind of either slow it down or make it not as extreme. It's still going to happen to an extent. And I feel like, and even if it doesn't, and we manage to fix it and it's all going great, like we discussed on this week's episode of This Week on Planet Earth, like with the whole asteroid deflection system that NASA's doing, like that could happen. Do you know what I mean? Like we could solve the climate, we could solve the food crisis, we could solve renewable energy, we could do the whole renewable transport thing. We could have cryptocurrencies that are leveling up third world countries, and we've got this whole space where we've digitalized art and everything's decentralized and everything's awesome, and we've got an economy that kind of runs off itself. But an asteroid could still come flying out of the infinite void, and if we haven't got settlements in other places, or anything happens to this one, like we would be totally screwed. So I feel like there's a bit of an urgency to all of them. I agree with you though on like climate and energy, and probably agriculture are really urgent. And that's another thing too, because like when we started this as to now, like we've had COP26 has happened, which was interesting. It was weird hearing world leaders being like, if we don't act now, there's no point doing one next year. Sounds like me and you when we're talking in the podcast. And then obviously there's always some idiot that decides I'm going to fly in a private jet less than 50 miles or whatever it is. But yeah, it's an interesting one. And that's what I've kind of realized too, is some of these things aren't really in the realms of science fiction anymore. Like they're totally doable. It's just the priorities probably aren't there, or the resources aren't there.
Yeah.
But that's positive too, because it means that if you can get the resources and the priorities to like the right people.
Yeah. As I said, in a lot of cases, like we can already do this. It's just, you know, in some ways, you know, we've done the hard bit. We've got the answers. We just need to follow them now. So
no, I'd agree.
Yeah.
So then obviously we had a catch-up episode after that. We had 2 episodes. We had a catch-up episode and we had our great interview with the UAP Media UK guys. And we came back in then on part 2, episode 30, and we did transportation. And this one was interesting because you went down the route of like renewable transportation methods, and you can tell this was the beginning of the series for me because I just went all out there. I was orbital rings, I had space elevators, light sails, maglev trains. But I found that episode really fun because it was cool, like learning about obviously like renewable methods of transportation or green methods of transportation. And I think it was around the time where you'd just done your rant on Twope News about what was it, the biodegradable clean gas or green oil or whatever it was.
I can't remember now. This is so long ago.
Yeah, there was something to do with some buses using some oils, some
biofuels.
Yeah, your mad little rant about biofuels. That was fun. And so it was around that time. But I enjoyed that episode because obviously I wanted to talk. I'd mentioned to you I wanted to talk about space elevators and orbital rings before that. So it was fun to go away and learn a little bit more about those and actually find that they are kind of possible. I don't know. I think you'd need to be multi-planetary before you built an orbital ring or space elevator, because it sounds like you need more resources than Earth has available to like build something as big as Earth around Earth. But it was cool.
Yeah. I've always said like this sort of stuff is what I enjoy. So it was a really good episode and a nice one to kick off with. And it's been sort of 6 months since then, but like we've already seen like a few developments in that time, you know. So during that time, and a lot of these are sort of on Twope News as well. Sort of developments in aviation, so looking at sort of new generation planes and sort of synthetic fuels that they want to get for aviation in the short term. And I saw a thing today about Elon Musk's boring company. So the tunnels they're building for, I think Las Vegas is getting they've signed off on it. They're getting a system that will go between like a few landmark places.
Nice.
So yeah, it's a fast developing one, and as you said, it's one that maybe requires a bit of urgency as well. So.
And like you mentioned as well with the whole, I think we spoke about this back then too, with like the whole hydrogen idea with having these like depots outside of cities for like delivery self-driving trucks and stuff too. And that's kind of all coming to fruition a little bit more too. So yeah, it's an interesting one. And transportation again has the like ability to completely level up the way that we view the world. Do you know what I mean? If we can have fast, like green transportation methods, it'd just be insane. And it's totally doable. Like we said in the episode, like most of these technologies have kind of been thought of. It's just whether or not money can be like thrown at them.
Transportation, but behind sort of food and energy is one of the like biggest influences on someone's lives. Like you can in somewhere like America and in like New York, you can map like that wealth is directly related to like access to like subways and stuff.
Yeah.
Because it gives you so many more opportunities to do stuff.
Yeah.
If you're not having to drive everywhere, or if you can't even afford to drive somewhere, if you have access to transportation, it gives you more opportunities. So yeah, it's interesting, and I think probably out of all of them, it's one that has sort of developed most over the last sort of 6 months or so. So
yeah.
Yeah.
And then obviously the following week, part 3, we did the Kardashev scale, which was one of the topics I'd mentioned before we even started this podcast that I wanted to do. And I said this in the episode. I was like, I've wanted to talk about the Kardashev scale since the beginning. So it was a very fun episode for me. I like talking about hypothetical ideas of where humanity is going to be. And I feel like out of all of them, if you're coming to this series for something that's like super sci-fi, that's probably the episode for you. Because we talked about type 1, which was all around the idea of harnessing all the energy from its local planet, and then type 2, which was harnessing the energy from its planetary system, and then type 3, which was harnessing the energy from its galaxy. And there were a few more, but we weren't sure on those ones. But yeah, I love that episode again. I found it fun. I always find it quite humbling to kind of like see where you are on that. Like, it's cool that there are 3 types and we're not even one yet. Do you know what I mean? It shows how far we've come, but how far we've like got yet to go. And some of those things are so inconceivable too. Do you know what I mean? Like, just the idea of having control over your entire galaxy is just ridiculous when we don't even have control over like the moons yet. You know what I mean? It's cool.
Yeah, it was an interesting one. Like you said, this is definitely more on your side of stuff. But yeah, it was interesting to talk about it. It stands out in the series as one that's definitely long term. Everything else I can sort of see happening in the next, say, 50 years, 100 years. This is definitely a few hundred years plus, I think.
And I think as well, it was good because it kind of laid the groundwork for the next episode, because we kind of started touching on this idea of like energy and why it was important, and why we needed to, like, because the whole point of the Kardashev scale was kind of just getting the most out of what you had in your surroundings, I guess, isn't it? Because it's like, if you've got a planet, how much can you get out of it? You have a solar system, how much can you get out of it? And then we obviously moved into renewable energy for part 4, which I know we kind of dialed it back a little bit. We weren't talking about like, I don't know, sticking a Dyson sphere around the sun, but it was cool to then go back and then look at our planet and be like, right, well, how can we figure out ways to harness this energy, and what are we doing to harness this energy that isn't like destroying the ecosystems either? And I really enjoyed that episode because we'd done an episode before, hadn't we? It was like one of the first ones, I think, that was called Sustainable Energy. And we touched on it a little bit and talked about how we talked about solar. I think we talked a little bit about wind, and I thought we talked a little bit about wave and tidal. And in this one, it was cool again because we were trying to look at ways that we could have energy systems or plans that would be long term and that would work for loads of places. And we looked at Iceland and loads of cool stuff. And I found this one interesting, but I've been getting into the climate, so I think that's probably why. But yeah, I thought it was a good episode to follow.
Yeah, and me, I remember, I think solar did feature quite heavily in it, and I've been watching quite a lot recently about sort of plans for solar, and it's quite interesting that out of everything, it seems very. It obviously isn't very easy to do, but you know, as I said, we are very capable of building enough sort of renewable energy now to like meet our needs. It's in some ways the more difficult side of it is like we talked about creating like smart grids and creating like a grid that's able to better control itself, because as you sort of integrate a lot of these renewables, your sort of peaks and troughs become a lot bigger. If you're not just running a nuclear power plant which runs at exactly the same thing all the time, you'll sort of have a lot of renewables that are distributed. So yeah, it was interesting, and I think it was one where I came out sort of quite positive. I was like, oh, this is good. Like we can do stuff here.
Yeah. No, I'd agree with you. I got that out of the next episode as well, with the part 5 agriculture and food one. Those 2 episodes, I felt really positive, because I liked how in the agriculture and food one there were a lot of quite like solid ideas for ending like world hunger, or figuring out ways to kind of lower carbon emissions and still get food out to people.
Yeah.
Especially the 3D printed and the lab grown food ideas. I know that sounds foreign to a lot of people, and it is a kind of weird concept, but I think it's really, really cool. And I think if you, like we've said before, if you want to be spacefaring, that's kind of required.
Yeah, definitely. It's not a topic that I sort of knew a huge amount, to be honest. You know, even things like renewable energy, I wouldn't say I'm massively informed about, but you know, you pick up stuff from the news and you always see news articles about solar farm or wind farms being built, but the agriculture stuff often slips sort of under the weather a bit, and sort of, yeah, as you said, on one end, you know, the lab grown stuff is pretty amazing, but I was also, you know, just the ways in which we do farming to make it more sustainable, I think is quite important. And yeah, it'll be interesting, particularly sort of in the UK with like Brexit at the moment. There's quite a lot of like debate about how yeah, we're going to do farming sustainably and do farming ethically. So it's definitely one where you can go like in a lot of different ways, because sort of growing up, I always thought that there was quite a big shift to sort of like organic stuff, and like be like when I was sort of like age 10, like organic stuff was like the good stuff, but that sort of has changed quite a bit recently. And the reality is that you want all of your food to be organic, because it's not sort of being treated with fertilizers, it's not being sort of genetically modified stuff. It requires a huge amount of area to farm it, whereas you know, it is sort of lettuce that's grown in a lab. So you know, we talked about hydroponics and stuff, so these labs that have just like trays and trays of lettuce growing sort of underground somewhere with artificial lights and these very, very sensitive water things, and it's able to feed them exactly the right nutrients. You get so much more food out of the energy and out of the space that, you know, maybe organic isn't good. I'm not saying that organic is bad or is but again, I think just sort of bringing back to like the bigger picture, this was the other big thing, and you touched on it. It's like these conflicting issues of all of these a lot of these episodes are about a problem and a solution to it, that a lot of the solutions come with very obvious benefits, but then when you step back, there's these sort of other sort of conflating issues. And in the agriculture food one, it is this sort of, you know, what is good, healthy food? And the reality is it's not entirely feasible that we could grow, you know, organic food for absolutely everyone using these sort of methods. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting one.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with you. I thought it was really cool. I liked all of the lab grown like stuff that they were doing, and I liked the 3D printed noodles as well that I think we talked about too. I thought that was a cool idea, because I swear noodles has already kind of like solved the food crisis once, didn't it? Wasn't that why they got invented? And then now like somebody's figured out a new way to 3D print them. So it's cool that they're repurposing themselves. And I swear I always see videos online of people fixing stuff with noodles. They like dry pack it in, sand it in and paint over it, and it drives me up the wall, but I always see it. But then we had part 6 of our series, which was medical technology. And this one was like way out of my scope. I think this was the first episode actually that when it started, we both said right off the get-go, I don't really know that much about this. Like, I think it was the first time that we both like were going in kind of like, what's going to happen here? But it was an interesting episode. I learned a lot. I learned a lot about like nanobots and what we can do with them. I liked the self-care approach that we discussed too, where it wasn't necessarily so much like new operations or new medicines, but just this idea of having like AI check in on you and monitor you. And we talked about it a little bit too in our AI series as well, how you could have like these pods that you could get into and they'd like scan you and check your health, and maybe you'd be a lot healthier if they could tell months before that, oh, your blood seems to be changed and it's showing this, so you should do this, and that would have like great effects for your future kind of thing. But yeah, I found that episode interesting. It was a different one though for me, because I'd already had my dreams kind of shattered by our Living Forever Christmas special that we did last year. Because when I started my research for that episode, I genuinely believed that like, oh, I'm gonna live forever, and this research here is gonna prove that. And by the end of the research in that episode, I was kind of just like, I'm indefinitely going to die at some point. And I kind of went in with the same kind of approach where I was just like, well, maybe my research, I can find cool stuff, but it's not going to be uploading minds to computers and stuff. But we kind of wanted to dial it back a little bit, didn't we? I know we did the Kajajef one where it was just discussing where we were on the scale and possible outcomes for the future. But with all of these, we've kind of tried to take the approach where it's at least in the next 100 years.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So we didn't want to go too crazy with the medical stuff either. But it was interesting, and it was cool seeing how, like, because I think we spoke about this too, this idea of how the life expectancy age, or not the life expectancy age, I can't remember which age it was now, but like one of them where it's not actually, it can't just keep getting longer, can it? Like there is a point that it kind of just stops, and we're almost there until we have to like do like serious biological changes to the body, right? So
yeah. I think sort of when we were discussing this, there's this idea of, you know, life expectancy, but then there's a separate idea of like years of good health. And as you said, like life expectancy, whatever the figure is, let's say 100 years, you know, it's seeming very unfeasible that we can just keep extending it out and sort of beyond 100 years, that people are living to 200 or 300 years old sort of thing. But the years of good health is this idea that, you know, well, if we're limited to how long we can live for, let's try and live those years as good as we can, you know, rather than where it's currently, where, you know, the last 5 or 10 years of your life, you know, plus years in between when you're ill, are sort of bad years, you know, where let's try and give people sort of longer lives with the lives they've already got. So it's definitely a thought-provoking one, because obviously it's a massive thing, and like you said, you can sort of get quite carried away and think, oh yeah, I'll just be a brain in a jar at some point. But
yeah, no, I'd agree with you. It was a weird one. It was interesting though, and I like hearing about cool new ways that we can attack certain things as well, because there was we did a whole bit, I think, as well, of just about like infections and pandemics, obviously because of, you know, being in one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we kind of came to the conclusion, like we did in every episode, which was we need to be proactive, not reactive. And if I have to start touring the whole of the United Kingdom and going to like every bar, every school, and just getting everybody to chant we have to be proactive instead of reactive. I will, because I feel like that's our biggest problem. And it's kind of the same with this one. Like, most of the time, and it's not even down to the human, it's just down to financial reasons. It's like, wait until you have this symptom, and then we'll see if we can do something about it.
Yeah.
I know obviously there are people that are like super hypochondriacs, and they'll go and get checked like every other week and for their entire life and stuff like that. But the average person, especially if you're not living in the UK and you can't afford healthcare, like you're not going to go and check to see what this pain is if it's going to cost you $1,000. Do you know what I mean? So I just feel like it's the same with all of them, even when it comes to climate.
Yeah, I was going to say that leads on to the next episode, which is climate. This idea of like being proactive, and it's about, as well as being proactive, it's about sort of incentivizing doing the right thing. You know, like I look at my life and I'll say now, like I am not good for the climate. Like I am rubbish for the climate. You know, I go on planes, I drive, I eat meat, but like this idea of very often that the bad thing is the easier thing to do, and like the system is set up in that way.
Yeah.
You know, like you always see these stories of sort of people like, oh, it's so much easier to fly anywhere than to get the train, or so much easier to drive anywhere. Like even for me, 95% of the journeys I take are by car, because there often isn't any other alternative, or the alternative is get on a bus for an hour and then waiting for 30 minutes at a bus station to get on another bus, and it costs me twice as much, and the buses are awful.
And you don't want to get a bus because it's a pandemic and everybody's like in a mood. Yeah, I get it.
And yeah, this idea of like being proactive and just like incentivizing the right thing. And there is a bit of sort of personal responsibility, but you know, we can set up systems that make people do other stuff, and you know, why can't we make people do this? Like this is not possible.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, and especially after this pandemic too, because we've had so long of just hearing like governments of the world be like, we don't have money to do that, like we can't shift to that, we can't do that. But then pandemic comes along and it's like, oh yeah, we can afford that, here's this money for this, or here's the money for that. And it's just like, and like we were saying before with like the COP26, like it really does feel like we're at a breaking point. And even if you look around and you like see what's going on, like it's insane. There's always fires, there's always flooding, there's always something happening somewhere. It's not like before where, like, I remember growing up as a kid, like off the top of my head, there aren't many like natural disasters that stand out. I've got the Thailand tsunami, maybe one or two volcanoes erupting. Couldn't tell you where they were, but just remember it taking out the flight routes and a couple of islands in the area. And then you'd see like flooding, or like there would be the occasional heat wave in the summer, and it would be a really big deal. But like nowadays, it's like you get heat waves in the summer consistently. You're getting flooding in the winter consistently. America seems to be on fire every single year in the same place consistently. You had the Amazon on fire. You had half of Australia on fire. And then you've got all these islands now that are like going underwater, and people from their like nations are coming on TV going like, please, what you are doing is directly putting my home underwater. And people don't even know, or don't care, or go, or look out their window and go, well, it's always been that way, so it will continue to be that way. And I think it's just scales, isn't it? We see in short scales, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Which is disappointing.
Yeah.
But and then obviously we'll try and pick it up. So the next episode was a pickup one. I feel planetary expansion was a good one to come after climate change, because we kind of told everybody about how we didn't do something, it was all going to be over. And then we were like, no, there is a plan B, and we'll try and make you feel a little bit better if it all goes wrong. And I enjoyed that one because it was cool looking at like bases on the moon. I liked how the moon's basically going to be a gas station for the future. I think that's awesome. I think we looked at those like tubes that had hollowed out from when they dried out in the moon, like structures that they wanted to build in because they think they could fit cities in them. And then we looked at Mars, and we talked about a lot about the rover from what I remember, and the helicopter, because me and you are obsessed with that. And then we talked a little bit about Moxie, because that was a big issue, wasn't it? Was how they were going to get oxygen to Mars, because it's not like the ISS or even to the moon to an extent where it's kind of like, you've ran out. We can get you supplies in this amount of days. Like the moon, Mars would take time. And if there was a problem like the Martian or something, it would be disastrous.
Yeah. We sort of said that, like, the moon being an exception because it's only sort of 3 days away. Going anywhere else, going to Mars or something is not the case of just sending people going there and see what it's like. It would almost certainly have to be setting up something that is at least partially self-sufficient.
Yeah.
I think, 1 or 2 missions of even that is, I think, really stretching it. We literally just put people there, they have a walk around, they come back, kind of thing. After that, any mission is going to have to be almost self-sufficient.
Yeah.
And just because of the timescales involved in this sort of stuff.
I'd agree with you. I think planetary expansion is probably one of the most positive things about our future if we can get it together a little bit more.
Yeah, I agree.
Some international cooperation, especially after this crap that Russia's just done. We don't want to be moving the ISS because people are blowing up satellites with experimental technologies.
Yeah.
But then part 9 then, before this episode, was all then on cryptocurrencies and NFTs, which I found really interesting. Anyone that follows me on Twitter obviously knows that I'm into that. My profile picture is an NFT. It's so I've been interested in the space. I think it's really cool that like creatives and art is finding a way to have value online because, like we mentioned in the episode, art has notoriously been right-clicked recently. Well, especially in the digital age, anything that you make, you kind of just have to accept that if somebody likes it, they can copy and paste it, unless you're making it for a client. And then that sucks sometimes too, because you're selling your soul. You're not creating art, you're making somebody else's vision, which obviously pays the bills, but it's not true art. So I think it's cool that you can kind of do what you want. And if somebody appreciates it now, they can buy it. I know I see so much stuff on Twitter that goes viral when people are like, just right-clicked it or something like that, and they're joking about it. And I get it because I think it's funny too, but it does make me laugh. Like the most recent one I saw was somebody had made a website where you could put in the link to an NFT that you liked, and it went in and took a copy of the the back end code, right, source code, but just changed the name in the ownership to whatever you typed in, so that if you right-clicked the NFT, you could, if you got into an argument with someone, say like at the pub, you could get out your like fake source code to show them that you owned this NFT. But I was like, if anybody just checked the actual blockchain, they'd see that you didn't. So it's like a lot of effort for something so ridiculous. So I find all that kind of stuff funny, and it does make me laugh when I see people like arguing in the comments. Like I saw one where it was like right-clicked it, and then someone was like, you can't right-click it, I have ownership. And then they like sent a photo of it on a digital
I saw that one
frame or something like that. And then the person was like, my lawyers will be in touch. And I was like, geez. But no, I think it's really interesting. And I think cryptocurrencies as a whole are really interesting. I think obviously they have huge, it's funny because it seems like they're just operating within rhythm of kind of like what inflation is at the moment. I feel like if you've got money in cryptocurrencies, what you've made in your gains is probably matching inflation. But yeah, I think it's interesting, and I think it has potential to level up third world countries that are trying to create wealth and have an economy. And I think I would prefer a decentralized economy in the future as to a centralized economy. So we'll have to see where it goes. And I really like the argument of like people deciding what it's worth as to like the government deciding what it's worth. But obviously they do need to make changes too, because there is this whole thing around it with it not being too good for the environment and all this other kind of stuff. So I feel like it's another thing that could be worked in progress, but in its pure like time scales, like how quick you can send money and how less it costs to send money, unless you're like playing with ETH and you've got gas fees, seems like the way forward. Seems very positive.
Yeah.
But yeah, and then now we're concluding all the way in November, which is absolutely ridiculous. It's been very long. But what we kind of thought we'd do to finish off this entire thing is we'd kind of conclude with where we think humanity will look in 50 years, where we think humanity will look in 100 years, and where we think humanity will look in 250 years. So I reckon we kind of just go through this together and kind of maybe have a look at our list and kind of just pick out a few for each. So in 50 years, Matty, what do you think's happening? Do you think we have figured out the climate crisis?
No. I think, just to sort of get ahead of myself, I think.
In fact, just give me your 50, 100, and 250. It'll be easier, probably.
I would say if I was going to sum at 50, 100, and 250, I'm going to, with one word each, I'm going to put 50 years disaster, 100 years recovering, 250 years better. That's what I'm going with. I think sort of 50 years, things will be looking pretty bad, climate-wise, and sort of a lot of these things. I think a lot of the areas will just be sort of taking adequate steps in. Transportation, I think, will be sort of waking up, and sort of things that we're planning now will be built, and we'll be like, oh, we probably need to do more on this, and the same with agriculture, and the same with medical stuff. But it will be looking pretty dire. And then once you sort of get through that and you start to wake up to it, and we start to implement these things, I think getting better 100 years and then 250 years, fingers crossed, will be sort of getting onto the sort of planetary expansion and proper renewable energy and transportation systems and things. So that's my big picture.
Yeah, I'd kind of agree with you. I'd say probably the only two on this list that I would say are looking positive in 50 years, I would probably say are planetary expansion and probably cryptocurrencies, because I can imagine if we can lower the cost of the energy usage for cryptocurrencies, it will probably be a world currency by then in 50 years, I can imagine. And with planetary expansion, we're already like doing the moon Artemis mission and the Mars mission. And even if the world goes to crap, I feel like there'll probably be quite a big focus on those bases, at least on the moon and on Mars. So I feel like those two might be quite positive in 50 years, but I feel like definitely the rest are it's gonna be a rude awakening, I think. But yeah, I'd agree with you. I think 50 years doesn't look good. 100 years, everybody's kind of sitting there with a hangover after what's happened. And then 250 years, the good stuff.
Yeah, which we may be around to see.
Which is interesting, because I reckon if you asked any human from any time period, those kind of time scales, they would probably say something quite similar. And it probably wouldn't even be around climate change or anything. Like if you asked just someone in like the Middle Ages, what do you think is going to happen in 50 years, 100 years, and 250 years? They'd be like, I don't know, but I feel like a disaster's coming in the next 50. They'll be recovering in 100, and in 250 years, they'll have the good life.
Yeah, the 250 one in particular, it is impossible to sort of like predict that sort of far ahead. Like if you went back to like
2271,
yeah,
that's when it was B.
But if you went back to like 1771, there is absolutely no chance that they could predict anything that we have nowadays. Like, not even close. Like,
yes. Even my RGB lights would scare them. Yeah, no, 100%. It will actually be crazy. That excites me though, you know, and it sucks because I'm not even going to be here for it. I don't know why I'm getting so excited, but it excites me. Like, just the idea of what is possible in the future excites me. And I think that's probably why this series has been 10-parters, because even though we do get like super down and have depressing like subjects sometimes, like I'd say me and you are very excited as a whole for the future. Maybe not for like the foreseeable or like the close future, but I'd say in general, there's a lot of cool things going on that gives me hope for our species. My kind of thing, I think this can be my dying words if anything ever happens to me, right? I just want to, I would be able to die happy knowing that whoever the planet's being left to has got everything that they need to be left with it. You know what I mean? All the tools.
Yeah.
It would suck to go out on this rock knowing that it's probably going to end for everybody else in the next 50 years too.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. So there you go. But yeah, so thank you everybody for tuning in on this absolute marathon of a series. Keep an eye out on social media for an upcoming poll on what our next series is going to be. You can also go and sign up to our amazing new newsletter on theinfinitevoid.com. We have a fancy website, which will be down below in the description. And if you're listening, it will be in the episode notes. If you aren't subscribed to our YouTube channel, please do, which is at Infinite Void Pod. And if you're not following us on Twitter and Instagram, go do the same at Infinite Void Pod. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Jacob E. Carson, and you can follow Matty at the Matty JMP. And yeah, guys, we will catch you next episode for our brand new series. Keep an eye out on social media for what's coming, and yeah, we'll see you then. Hey everyone, we wanted to take a moment to tell you about our brand new Patreon page.
Yeah, so we've devised a load of new goodies that are neatly packaged across 3 different tiers for you.
Tiers start at £3 and go all the way up to £10 a month.
Just to say, the Patreon is in no way an obligation, and we're going to continue making the podcast as it is freely available across all the platforms. But if you'd like to support us and show your support, you can now.
So yeah, head over to patreon.com/Infinite Void Pod for more information.